So to begin, today I want to talk about our new cyber learning environment, describe some problems and needs, say what I mean by cyber learning, what is this word, bring you up to date on our National Science Foundation Cyber Learning Report. So I will highlight a strategy report that we spent some time on around the future of cyber learning and its research. I'll tie that into our new National Education Technology Plan and describe several grand challenge problems in near-term central issues. So I believe you may share many of the United States' big problems and needs. Because it's the National Science Foundation that funds much of our work, we talk often about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, not because humanities and arts and language are not important, and they certainly need to be integral, but it's a major issue in the United States, this large loss of human capital around innovation. And so I will often be talking here about STEM, and that's what I'm referring to. So we also have a shortage of high-quality K-12 STEM teachers. Our education in science and mathematics has dropped considerably. We look at best like a middling country. There's diminished STEM interest for learners. Many of our learners are not as interested as they once were in these subjects. There are inequalities in technology-enhanced opportunities to learn. We have poor support for teachers learning how to integrate information technologies in the classroom into pedagogy. We have lagging school ICT leadership. We have broadband network gaps, especially in rural America. And a small percentage of our college faculty model innovative uses of technology in their own teaching. So how are our learners, our future teachers in the subject matter, supposed to pick up these new techniques? At least in the States, our science lab facilities are outmoded and need serious upgrading. And we have an uncoordinated and underprepared research and development community for inventing the future of this network-mediated learning. So I want to stress that not all of these problems admit of technological solutions, but certainly designs for ICT could catalyze advances and accelerate needed transformations on these problems. So we sketched a vision in this report for the National Science Foundation of the future of cyber learning, a vision of the year 2015, not so far away, where we say, imagine a high school student in 2015. She's grown up in a world where learning is as accessible through technologies at home as in the classroom, and digital content is as real to her as paper, lab equipment, or textbooks. At school, she and her classmates engage in creative problem solving by manipulating simulations in a virtual laboratory, or downloading and analyzing visualizations of real-time data from remote sensors, studies they may have helped design. Away from class, she has seamless access to school materials and homework assignments using inexpensive mobile devices. She continues to collaborate with her classmates in virtual environments that allow not only social interaction with each other, but rich connections with a wealth of supplementary content. Her teacher can track her progress over the course of a lesson plan, compare her performance and aptitudes across a lifelong digital portfolio, making note of areas that need additional attention through personalized assignments, and alerting parents to specific concerns. So what is cyber learning and why are we using this phrase? So this is a task force that the National Science Foundation convened to help it define priorities for the next 10 years of funding. The National Science Foundation funds a little over $6 billion of research work in the United States. It's the principal vehicle for science and also for education in the disciplines. And we were, it was an industry and researcher-oriented group, mostly academics, but obviously also teachers, professors. And we spent quite some time working on our focus. And our focus was defining cyber learning as that learning that is mediated by networked computing and communication technologies. And I want to say why. So cyber learning, of course, evokes cyber infrastructure. This is a term, perhaps unfortunate, that our federal government and its funding agencies picked with the phrase, if infrastructure is required for industrial economy, the roads and so forth, then we could say that cyber infrastructure is required for a knowledge economy. So this is not simply hardware, software, but also the human practices and knowledge that's needed for a knowledge economy. Thank you. Cyber was also intended to evoke Norbert Wiener's concept of cybernetics, which was built on the Greek word for steering. And we think this is especially relevant because cyber learning is learning in a networked world. I want to hold on that phrase, learning in a networked world, where the steering of learning can arise in a hybrid way from a variety of personal, educational, or collective sources and designs. So I can pursue a learning path that I have through my own intention and search through the web and learning pathways. Educators can design for me pathways, or there can be hybrid pathways. So cyber learning, we would argue, has the potential to transform education through a lifetime, enabling customized interaction with diverse learning materials on any topic. It's also, and this is, I think, a very interesting, an important, exciting point for us, it's an endless frontier. We will never be done either creating or studying cyber learning because the content will always be advancing. The representational and computer technologies and associated user experiences with that content with which we learn will be developing, as will the social and organizational arrangements where we find ourselves doing the learning. And so with our endless ability to continue to innovate new designs for how we learn the complexities of the evolving disciplines, we will never be done. So why cyber learning now? There's actually been, and I know that you know this well at CET, we have not only powerful new technologies, but increased scientific understanding of learning and instruction, and widespread demands for solution to educational problems. Over the last decade or so, there's been considerable integration in ways that did not happen as much before in the development of technologies and in our understandings of how people learn. They've evolved together. And there have also been new approaches to research and design that make the development and testing of technologies more responsive to real-world requirements and learning environments. We highlighted, and this is a packed slide, I understand, what we viewed the principal themes of the next decade of technology-enhanced learning opportunities to combine. So let's look at each of these. Very low cost, always on networked smart mobiles. Elastic cloud computing that enables you, whether it's Amazon or Google, to have access to software and services and storage in a way that can scale or shrink as a function of what you need. A participatory media culture, about which more in a moment. Increasingly open education resources tagged to learning standards. More accessible open platforms, this is a key theme, for developing learning and educational tools for use anytime. Ubiquitous sensors, GPS and other, and location-aware services for learning in the world. Because if we're going to be out in the world with smart devices and able to connect to resources, it may make a difference to know where we are. You may need to know different things or have different things to contribute depending on where you are. Increasingly accessible data visualization to give people an understanding of data and how to reason with data. Immersive worlds and games, but for learning as well. And social networks used for learning and education, which we're starting to see, even in places like Facebook. So these developments, we argue in our report, provide widespread access to increasingly sophisticated technologies and advances in understanding of how individuals learn that could provide stunning opportunities to transform education worldwide. And as we heard earlier today on the University of the People, these advances are very important because we cannot physically construct the needed universities, schools, and classrooms to serve education needs. India is a great example, Africa another. And right in front of our eyes, then the learning and educational platform of the century is emerging, and it's not the classroom or the school. Although I deeply hope that schools, classrooms, and educators can figure out how to harness these resources. The surprising result to many is that youth are mostly wired and ready for tomorrow's education. These are some numbers from a US study. The Pew Internet and American Life Project does these national stratified samples. So here we see a girl off to the left in this illustration. Notice her concurrent open channels of cell call, MySpace social network. You can tell that's an old slide. iPod, music player, several books, television. She's eating. And almost all of our teens now use the internet. 3/4 of them use social networking websites. 3/4 of them have cell phones. Not all smartphones, of course. Nearly 2/3 of them get online news on current events and politics. 3/4 have broadband at home. They often don't have this at school. 69% have their own computer, 80% their own game console, 51% their own mobile gaming console, and the last graphic in the middle there shows the percentage that create various kinds of content or remix it or blog. So even on the numbers around use of the internet, I want to contrast that 93% of teens with 74% of American adults. So teens are much more connected to the network than adults. So it's perhaps not surprising that we don't fully understand what they're up to. And those devices that they have, those game consoles, are now also providing new ways to go online for web access. Those are also internet access platforms and potentially learning platforms, the gaming platforms. And so many of today's digital natives who exploit these tools to understand and learn on their own are very frustrated. They will talk about how school makes me power down. They will say that the schools are unchanged from their parents, that they're unconnected from their real-time ties to the web for information, and their friends that they experience outside school where they can learn in the ways that they like. So what has enabled these changes? It's worth reflecting on this for a little bit because these trends are not going away. We have ICT, now ubiquitous for everyday use in developed nations, with huge and relatively unexplored implications for education. Over 2 billion people now have internet access. 600 million of those in the last 2 years. 5 billion people have a mobile phone. The proportion of these mobiles that are on broadband networks is growing quickly. In Europe, in 2 years, it'll be 50%. The web technologies, of course, are now enabling people to share, access, publish, and learn from online content and software. You have this remarkable convergence of professional tools where desktops and laptops have merged with personal technologies. Cell phones, PDAs, you know the list here, and even a new generation of televisions from Apple, Google, Intel. Of course, also networked content, where you're starting to see rich, immersive learning environments, not only the traditional consumable classroom content, although I know CET has been developing a variety of rich network content for some time. And also a major cultural change, a participatory culture that involves many more open resources than in the past, and a sense of a digital commons to contribute to and benefit from. This issue of harnessing collective intelligence in the digital commons is worth reflecting on as educators. A major reason why we're spending so much more time online is that we collectively have been making the information there much more useful to us. We are making the information useful by our interacting with it online. Whenever we go creating hyperlinks, as you know, making connections between web pages, this then gets harvested by Google's PageRank algorithm that uses the web link structure to give you better search results, to help you identify more influential resources. Yahoo's directories serve as a portal to the collective work of web users who have been doing these productions. Tagging helps others find resources such as photos, bookmarks, blogs, and videos. The recommendation engines that you use with iTunes help them sell songs, Amazon sell books, Netflix rent movies. This is all coming out of your activity on the web. And finally, at least a number of people are starting to sense a potential, and I know that this is often made fun of in education, although it seems to be doing well in other disciplines, a long tail for learning resources, whatever your interests. perhaps we can develop a long tail in learning where the interest that somebody has that they're passionate about can provide a pathway into a variety of subject matters. Why not have a curriculum that enables someone to take an interest that they have and to have that enable them to have a learning pathway that builds their understandings in math, in engineering, and language arts. So again, just a few quick facts. That Wikipedia, launched only a decade ago, now has over 13 million articles in 200 languages. The video explosion is phenomenal. More video uploaded to YouTube in the last 2 months than if the 3 major TV networks in the US had been airing new content every hour of the day since 1948. And that's accelerated since the year that these graphics were produced last year. There are now 35 hours of video uploaded each minute to YouTube. 35 hours a minute. Children are learning to play piano, guitar, cook, all kinds of things from web content that they're sharing with one another. And there were 700 billion videos viewed last year in YouTube. The computer in your cell phone today is 1 million times cheaper, 1,000 times more powerful, and 100,000 times smaller than the one computer at MIT only 45 years ago. Those are amazing numbers. And the mobile device will be the world's primary connection tool to the internet in 2020, and we would argue also the principal learning platform on the planet. So let's just reflect now on what are the emerging learning environment properties we should be designing for. A fast-growing participatory culture, engaging youth. Henry Jenkins at MIT, now University of Southern California, has written quite a bit about this. A culture with relatively low barriers to artistic expression, civic engagement, strong support for creating and sharing creations, and some type of informal mentorship whereby what's known by the most experienced is passed along to novices. It's fueled by software as services platforms that enable people, so long as they can get through onto the internet, to create, consume, remix content. It's driven by social networks. On-demand learning resources are sought out via search engines. You don't have to do too much ethnography with youth today to see them ask questions, have debates, and immediately go to search engines on 5 minutes. Oh, I'm frightened. Okay, let me jump ahead. Vygotsky. I want to bring him into the moment. So Vygotsky, a very influential Soviet psychologist for many of us in education, highlights how the central fact about our psychology is the fact of mediation. I want to give this historical framing to where we are in cyber learning. What he means by this is that subject and object are connected directly, the two of us face to face, but also indirectly, through the mediation of cultural artifacts that we invent, such as language, mathematics, but also, of course, programming, diagramming, a variety of things like virtual worlds. And due to this mediation, human experiences and how people learn have evolved substantially in this last several millennia without any evolution of our biological substrate. It's a miracle, the miracle of mediation. Colleagues Douglas Brown and John Seeley Brown say sites such as MySpace or YouTube are more than just collections of pages. They are communities of interest and in some cases networks of practice. Shared interests provide a reason for people to come together. Networks of practice, the technological means to share and create practices. So the centrality of mediation is vital for learning futures, and I want to go through this diagram which we developed for the NSF report to take a large view. So this figure is intended to depict historical advances in the communication and information resources available for human interaction. On the left side, basic face-to-face interaction at the most basic level required no resources to mediate communication. We're in caves, we're running around in fields. We don't have simple systems that we write down, art, written language. But the second wave of resources offered these symbol systems and introduced a mediating layer between people. The communication revolution of radio, telephony, television, and satellites is a third wave, again creating new kinds of activities, like broadcast media. The outcomes of the fourth wave, networked personal computers, web publishing, global search, set the stage for a fifth wave of cyber infrastructure and participatory technologies that I've been describing. And here, I think, is what's relevant about this, that the set of actions and interactions that people consider possible, the intentions that they choose to form for what they might do, has changed with each new wave of mediating technologies, from writing to telephony, the internet to cyber infrastructure. So we can now not only interact at a distance, but access complex and useful resources in ways unimaginable in early eras. And for our youth, it means that it changes the possible goals that they may have. Students at a high school get upset at what a principal does. At the end of the day, they have 450 virtual signatures from a Facebook page. This is a different kind of activity. They can use virtual observatories and do original astronomy work, and so forth. Is it truly 5 minutes? Because if so, I'm going to have to really rethink this. So in principle, we've got exceptional resources for human learning and activities that we think we can make continuously accessible through these networks over time. But do we really know enough about learning over space and time to guide the design of learning environments in this ubiquitous computing future? So I want to only allude to, I don't have the time today to describe this basic research that a network of our universities working together are tackling in something called the Life Center. This is learning in informal and formal environments. And this is all around developing and testing principles about the social foundations of human learning across environments. So lifelong, life-wide. So look at this diagram and see these orange bands in the middle. This describes what percentage of the waking day people are in organizations in which there are designed learning environments, right? So it's a very small percentage of the time. I really want to stress this. It's less than 20% of the child's day through K to 12, smaller after. So in this sea of blue, there is a phenomenal amount of learning that's going on. Some of it is designed by parents, grandparents. It's designed in informal learning environments like museums and so forth. But these are very important forms of learning. And when we then have mobile devices continuously available across these different settings, we really believe that a lifelong, life-wide focus, if we begin to understand the mechanics, the dynamics, the intentions of learning outside formal education systems, it creates a very new design space, calling for new understandings of learning contexts, of identities, of interests that fuel or impede learning. And so I just want to leave you with that concept and then think about how I'm going to spend my last several minutes. So I think I can do this synoptically. So let's just see. We established a few priorities, and the NSF has picked up a number of them and is funding a new $40 million program that started this year on research in cyber learning across the K-16 curriculum. And we identified a few priorities that I think it'd be worthwhile to share with you because we looked at quite a number of options. So the question was, what opportunities have the greatest short-term payoff and long-term promise for tackling those problems I pointed to earlier? And they include using technologies to coordinate learning across formal and informal context, not only in school, to connect students with remote and virtual laboratories, which often means that they need to be designed and invented, and to access interactive virtual or mixed reality environments for learning in the disciplines. We also have to build a cyber learning field. This is not a field that exists very well now. We need new programs, centers, and training. A second priority is enabling students to use scientific data. There is an absolute explosion of data coming from sensors, virtual observatories, and other environments, as well as, for teachers, the data coming from children when they're using cyber learning technologies. How can we teach students and teachers how to harness these large amounts of data? Because cyber learning can transform, not only make more efficient, the learning in the STEM disciplines. Gives you new ways of looking at and understanding the content. For example, preparing students for computational thinking throughout curricular topics, building simulations and models. An example here is the Galaxy Zoo. So this is a place where the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, which is often called the Cosmic Genome Project, the world's largest digital map of the universe, a crowdsourcing project was developed where the public was asked to do visual classifications of 1 million galaxies. And the response was just overwhelming. Over 100,000 people participated, creating 40 million new classifications and some discoveries. This is an example. There are more where students being able to participate in using scientific data is an interesting development. Teachers, I must focus here on teachers. They're a key component of the learning environment, and there needs to be a use of technologies in support of their learning as well, including video-based communities of practice. We're now getting into a point where teachers could, if policy allows, share their video of their teaching practices and of student work and have discussions around those in order to go improving the nature of their practice. We have something called FERPA laws in the United States. These are being rewritten to make activities like this possible. Priority 3, harnessing learning data. The Pittsburgh Science of Learning Center, among other places, is starting to discover that when you do a lot of the learning in a classroom online, they have intelligent tutoring systems, you can begin to mine the data from tens of thousands of students taking the same course and discover inefficiencies in the designs. Right, so I won't get into the details of this, but they ended up, once they looked at, in geometry here, showing changes in student error rates for computing circle, trapezoid, square, rectangle, that kids already knew quite a bit about squares and rectangles. So they ended up chopping out most of that in the curriculum and had kids getting just as far with 20% less time. A platform perspective. This is really key in the US at least, probably here as well. Shared interoperable designs of hardware and software and services, because largely in the US, projects have been funded as individual research groups and centers, very much redundancy, different groups creating graphing programs and the like. The argument here is that the NSF should fund platforms that are shared, interoperable. I will skip these slides. We can talk about them later. A large focus on OER. We're really aggressive about this. The federal government, we argued, insofar as it's funding the creation of learning resources, should be open. Should be open under Creative Commons licenses for free, unrestricted sharing, reuse, and recombination. So that's the end of my very brief summary of this report. Since that time, just 2 years ago, just to see how quickly things have changed, the smartphone market has 500,000 apps. Many of these are of interest to education. We have new Common Core standards in the United States, at least, in math and English language arts, new science standards appearing this year, a number of inspiring visions in the policy and partnership environment, a new program. Unfortunately, budget crises, so I don't know how far we're going to get with any of this. But in the National Education Technology Plan, and I'm only going to share one slide from this because of the time. We've had National Education Technology Plans since back in the Clinton period. And as I highlighted this morning, they've always been about what's in the classroom and counted computers. That's largely what they were about. They weren't about research, about science. They weren't about learning, access to opportunity, or designing the system. So this is actually one where it calls for, and this is a quote from the National Plan, an action plan for revolutionary transformation rather than evolutionary tinkering. Why is it transformative? Well, first we focused outside schools. We took this whole notion from the Cyber Learning Report and said that we have to focus on the whole ecology of learning environments and beyond K-12 also to lifelong learning. Parents are part of it. We focused on transformative system-wide redesign and on processes of continuous improvement for learning, assessment, teaching, infrastructure, and productivity. All 5 of these have to change in concert. We can't just work on one piece. And finally, we emphasized applying the advanced technology available in our daily lives, the things I was showing as part of the emerging trends, to student learning in our entire education system in innovative ways that will improve designs, accelerate adoption, and measure outcomes. So like I say, I'm going to spin past these. These are documents that are available online. We did lay out a framework for designing. This is intended, by the way, to be a 5-year plan, so it might look immensely ambitious, but there were quite a number of meetings with industry, not only with educators, state education technology coordinators. They really wanted a vision. We crafted a vision. And lastly, we laid out a number of grand challenge problems. So grand challenge problems are interesting because they've galvanized the field of mathematics with Hilbert's address in 1900 of 23 major mathematical problems to be studied. In high performance computing, we had grand challenge problems. We see them also in environmental sciences and health sciences. We think we need our own grand challenge problems for cyber learning. What's a grand challenge problem? Understandable with significance, challenging and timely, clearly useful if the problem's solved, and testable and incremental in terms of metrics. So we sketched out, and I'm only going to mention one here, grand challenge problems in the National Education Technology Plan. These are global issues. These aren't simply American issues. Design and validate an integrated system that provides real-time access to learning experiences, tuned to the levels of difficulty and assistance that optimize learning for all learners, and that incorporates self-improving features that enable it to become increasingly effective through interaction with learners. You've seen some of these topics before in relation to adaptive instruction, individualized instruction, but I think what's different from those days is that they were driven by instructional design and had a lot less understanding of the interests of learners outside of the school classroom, the ecology of environments in which learners are participating. And I will mention 2 open questions and then get off the stage. One is, how can far more teachers be supported in integrating technology within their courses for deeper student learning? Secondly, how can education system policies adapt more rapidly to the present opportunities? These we saw in the National Ed Tech Plan as 2 of the really pivotal issues to be worked on right away. And finally, I've highlighted why cyber learning, why we think this is important. I've summarized the sweeping changes in our technology environments as we advance how learning gets mediated. I reviewed really briefly key elements of the National Ed Tech Plan as revolutionary system redesign beyond school, and suggested a couple priorities to tackle as a community. Thank you.